Ireland has produced a lot of great WWE superstars over the years, be it Finn Balor, Becky Lynch, or even Fit Finlay. That said, however, none of them thus far have been able to have the longevity of Sheamus within the promotion. Yes, from his main roster debut all the way back in 2009, Sheamus has been a continual main event level presence in the company, using his hard-hitting, stiff European style to win 4 world titles over the course of his run. And even with all that under his belt, he doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. So join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey so far in Celtic Warrior, The Sheamus Story. Stephen Farrelly was born in Dublin, Ireland on January 8, 1978. And it was there that, while attending both Scoil Coivin Primary and the Gaelscoil Colestmuir secondary schools, he would sing in the Palestrina choir until the age of 13. This seeing him appear on a number of local TV shows at the time. But singing wasn't his only love, because Stephen was a big sports fan too. Unsurprising given how big and naturally athletic he was. Yes, as well as being a fan of wrestling via WWE and World of Sport as a child, the youngster also took part in both Gaelic football and rugby, with him eventually playing for the Aran Isles team in the former and the National College of Ireland in the latter. After graduating from college with his national diploma, however, he put this to the side for the time being as he began working as an IT technician, security guard, and bodyguard, with him at one point even offering personal security to U2 members Bono and Larry Mullen. But that wasn't what he wanted to do long-term, of course, and so, in April of 2002, at the age of 24, Farrelly decided that he wanted to give pro wrestling a try, with him heading over to New Jersey to sign up to Larry Sharp's Monster Factory Wrestling School. And it was here that he would learn the ropes and, after just 6 weeks of training, make his in-ring debut under the name Sheamus O'Shaughnessy. Sadly though, his lack of experience prior to stepping in the ring would come back to bite him here, because after botching a hip toss in an early match, he would suffer a serious neck injury that would sideline him for the next 2 years. By the time he finally returned to action in 2004, he was back in Ireland again, and this time he began performing for Irish Whip Wrestling in Dublin. And it was here he would find success, eventually becoming the inaugural IWW International Heavyweight Champion on March 28th of that year. After this big win, he would dominate the promotion for a time, going through the likes of Darren Burridge, D'Lo Brown, and Vampiro, before getting into a feud with future WWE Champion Drew Galloway. The rivalry between the Irishman and the Scotsman would go on to define both of their early careers in many ways, sparking a lifelong friendship that continues to this day. Out of their many encounters around this time, perhaps their most memorable was their back-to-back 2 out of 3 falls bouts on March 18th and 19th, 2005, the latter of which Sheamus has gone on to say was his best while on the indie circuit. Eventually though, even the mighty O'Shaughnessy would fall to the Scottish Warrior, as on August 28th of that year, the Scotsman was finally able to pin his foe to win the IWW title from him. After losing the gold then, Sheamus spent a year jumping around the British and Irish indie circuit, having a series of matches against the likes of Robbie Brookside and Nigel McGuinness, as well as a few more battles with McIntyre. By early 2007, however, it was clear that bigger things were on the horizon for both men, as they were signed up to WWE after making an appearance as security guards during an episode of Raw filmed in London in November the year prior. Following that, the two were shipped back over to America, where they would be assigned to Florida Championship Wrestling, the company's developmental promotion at the time. And here, Sheamus O'Shaughnessy would quickly impress his bosses with his hard-hitting British strong style of performing, eventually beating Jake Hager to become the Florida Heavyweight Champion for a period, and then, from there, briefly teaming with Ryback, as the two chased after the Florida Tag Team titles together. Of course, with Drew Galloway, then going by Drew McIntyre, on the same roster as him, it wouldn't be long before the two would come together again. They would initially team up for a while, but eventually found themselves in a blood feud over the Florida World title, a feud that Sheamus would ultimately lose, as by July of 2008, he had begun to get eased up to the main roster when he started appearing in dark matches at SmackDown and Raw tapings, taking on the likes of R-Truth and Jamie Noble. Clearly feeling he was ready for the big time then after seeing these matches, Vince McMahon decided to give him his official call-up a year later on the June 20th, 2009 episode of ECW, where he would shorten his name to just Sheamus and enter into programs with Goldust and Shelton Benjamin. And with the success of these, the Irishman was moved over to the Raw brand in October of the same year, destroying a number of performers such as Jamie Noble and Jerry Lawler during his initial weeks there. So taken was the boss with him by this point that he even spared him the usual months and years of working his way up the card and instead hotshotted him into the main event picture by having the Celtic Warrior challenge John Cena for the WWE title at December 13, 2009's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view. And on this night, to the shock of many, Sheamus would actually beat the champ, dropping him through a table to become WWE Champion for the first time. This making him the first ever Irish-born WWE Champion in history. Now, there have been a lot of urban myths surrounding this match, as it's been suggested that Cena accidentally went through the table that night, leading the company to have to call an audible. But while it is true that the match accidentally ended early that night, it was always the plan for Sheamus to win anyway, as McMahon already saw a huge star in the making with him. And with the boss all in, the Irishman went on a string of successful title defenses in the weeks that followed, only losing the title during the Elimination Chamber match after being eliminated by Triple H. This set up a big rematch between the two at WrestleMania 26, a match which Sheamus would lose, though this would still firmly establish him as a top-level guy. Fans bought into this too, and so they weren't surprised when at June 20th's Fatal 4-Way pay-per-view later that year, the Celtic Warrior was able to regain the WWE title after once again pinning John Cena. After that, he continued to feud with Big Match John, successfully defending his title before moving on to a program with Randy Orton. And while he would initially stand tall over the Viper, it would be Orton who would eventually dethrone him at the September 19th Night of Champions in another multi-man match that proved the best way to beat Sheamus was to put him up against a number of opponents at once. He was able to bounce back from this, however, when he won the 2010 King of the Ring on November 29th, beating Kofi Kingston and John Morrison for the honor, and immediately rechristening himself as King Sheamus afterwards. From there, WWE's new king continued to feud with Morrison for a while until Triple H returned in February of 2011 to exercise his revenge on the Irishman, who had been the one to take him out of action for 10 months after kayfabe injuring him prior to this. This led to another brief program between the two real-life gym buddies, after which Sheamus set his sights on putting gold around his waist once again as he began going after the United States champion Daniel Bryan. And it wouldn't take long for him to topple Bryan as it turned out, because on March 14th, he was able to pin him to hold the US strap above his head for the first time in his career. From there, the two were set to have a rematch at WrestleMania 27. However, this would end up getting bumped down to the pre-show instead, something we'll come back to soon. After that, though, Sheamus continued to defend the title, eventually taking it over to SmackDown with him when he was moved over to the Blue brand during the 2011 draft. Soon after this, he would drop the belt to Kofi Kingston. However, this only served to light a fire under him as the Celtic Warrior turned babyface and set about fixing his ways by taking on heels such as Mark Henry and ultimately going on a 14-match winning streak before Christian would cost him a victory. This sparking a feud between them that would see the Irishman soundly get his revenge when he beat his opponent 3 straight times in the weeks that followed, once at Hell in a Cell, again at Vengeance, and once more on an episode of SmackDown. After that, he would set about scaling another mountain when he entered the 2012 Royal Rumble, eventually last eliminating Chris Jericho to win the whole thing and book himself a world title shot at WrestleMania 28. And the World Heavyweight Champion at this point was Daniel Bryan, the very man who Sheamus was supposed to face on the main card at WrestleMania the year prior before they were bumped off of it. With this in mind then, the two were excited to get a chance to make up for this and have an absolute classic when the time came for the rematch that April. Unfortunately, WWE saw things a little differently, however, and instead of letting them have a lengthy encounter in a main event spot, they were put on first that night, with Sheamus pinning Bryan in just 18 seconds after the latter was distracted by his, at the time, girlfriend AJ Lee. The idea behind this was to start off the show with a bang and have a dominating babyface win for the Irishman, but it ended up backfiring spectacularly as WWE had grossly underestimated how much fans were getting behind Daniel Bryan, with the subsequent backlash sparking off the Yes movement and making Sheamus look like a villain in many of their eyes. The company did push through this, however, and kept presenting Sheamus as a babyface while he defended the title against the likes of Alberto Del Rio and Dolph Ziggler in the months that followed, with him only losing the gold at that October's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view when the Big Show was able to best him. This, of course, led to a series of rematches between the two big men, and though Sheamus would be unable to regain the title from the Big Show, he would get some measure of revenge over him when he beat him in a non-title lumberjack match before the year was out, putting to bed the feud even if he no longer had gold around his waist. Clearly, he needed to regroup then, and he began doing this in early 2013 when, after each man had found themselves frequent targets of the Shield, Sheamus teamed up with John Cena and Ryback to take on the invading force at February's Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. And, being unable to end the Shield's reign of dominance at that show, Sheamus and Orton soon found a new partner in the Big Show, though even this wouldn't be enough to topple the Hounds of Justice, as it turned out. This eventually led to a beef developing between the Irishman and the Viper as they squared off in a match on the Raw after WrestleMania 29, most memorable now for being the one that was completely hijacked by the audience, who spent the whole thing doing Mexican waves and chanting for the likes of CM Punk and Randy Savage, beginning a post-Raw WrestleMania tradition that would continue on in the years that followed. After that, the Celtic Warrior got into a feud with Mark Henry, as both men began trying to outdo each other in various tests of strength. And with Sheamus predictably being unable to beat the world's strongest man in these, he ended up retaliating by attacking Henry, this leading to an underrated strap match between the two at May 19th's Extreme Rules. From there, he had brief programs with Damien Sandow and Alberto Del Rio before suffering a torn labium in his shoulder, putting him out of action for the next 6 months as he underwent surgery. And perhaps this turned out to be a blessing in disguise as, by then, he had become such a regular fixture on TV for so long that fans were starting to take him for granted and perhaps even bore of him. So it was definitely a case of absence making the heart grow fonder when he returned at the January 2014 Royal Rumble, and from there, quickly set about reasserting himself on Raw as he challenged for the WWE title the next month. Unfortunately though, he would not win the big prize again at this time, but by May, he would have recovered when he won a 20-man Battle Royal to determine the new United States Champion. After this, the Celtic Warrior began a feud with Cesaro, and from there, tried to add to his belt collection by entering the Money in the Bank ladder match and the Battle Royal for the vacant Intercontinental title in the months that followed. Now, he wouldn't win either of these in the end, but he did continue to defend the US title in another bout with the Swiss Superman at September 21, 2014's Night of Champions, with this match proving a taster of the excellent series the two would have not much longer after this. Once that was done with, though, things would have to slow down for a while, as an injury would force Sheamus to take some time off for surgery, with him dropping the belt to Rusev before taking his leave. When he returned to the ring on the March 30th, 2015 episode of Raw, he was now sporting a new look, with a mohawk haircut and a braided beard helping him freshen up his gimmick as he would turn heel for the first time in 4 years, starting a program with Dolph Ziggler which culminated in a comedic Kiss Me Arse match at April's Extreme Rules. From there, he surprised many when he won the Money in the Bank ladder match at that year's titular pay-per-view, and after that, immediately began teasing cash-ins while also having a summertime feud with Randy Orton. It wasn't until November, however, when, just seconds after Roman Reigns had won a one-night tournament to crown a new WWE champion, Sheamus came in to ruin the party, cashing in his Money in the Bank contract and pinning the big dog to steal the gold. Allegedly, the idea behind this was that, given the Celtic Warrior had been portrayed as more of a mid-carder in recent years, fans would be upset when he was given the world title, and would instead be desperate to see Reigns take it from him. It was one of WWE's many attempts to get Roman over, and, for that moment at least, it worked out, because after forming a stable of dastardly foreigners called the League of Nations, which included Alberto Del Rio, Rusev, and Wade Barrett, Sheamus was able to get under fans' skins enough that they began cheering for the challenger instead. And so when Reigns beat the champion on the December 14th episode of Raw to take the belt from him, it seemed like it was a job well done from the Irishman. Of course, things would ultimately get worse before they got better for Reigns, but for more details on that, go check out our video on him. When it came to Sheamus though, he stuck with the League of Nations for a while as they got involved in a feud with the New Day that carried over into the new year, this leading to a 6-man tag between both teams at WrestleMania 32. One which would end with the heels getting the win, only for them to then get a post-match beatdown from legends Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, and Mick Foley, leaving the crowd happy. Soon after this, the League of Nations began to splinter when Barrett was kicked out of the group for being the perceived weak link. Not long after that, and the remaining 3 members would find themselves unable to coexist as well, this ultimately causing them to disband after Sheamus was drafted over to Raw full-time, where he reignited his feud with Cesaro. And just like with all their previous encounters, this was a feud which would play to both men's strengths perfectly, as the Swiss Superman's stiff European style was able to complement Sheamus's, as the two went on to knock lumps out of each other in a best-of-7 series during the weeks that followed. And when it came time for the final of this series, it was announced that the winner would receive a future title shot, giving added incentive for each to get the decisive victory. That's why it came as a surprise then when things concluded with a no contest in their deciding bout at September 25, 2016's Clash of Champions. And with no winner to award the prize to, Raw General Manager Mick Foley was forced to give them both a title shot, that being a tag team title shot, as the two enemies became unlikely allies, being forced to cooperate as they challenged, but ultimately failed to dethrone the New Day in the weeks that followed. Still, by that point, both Sheamus and Cesaro had discovered that as a unit, they had excellent chemistry together, and so they continued their union anyway, labeling themselves The Bar, with both men turning heel. And now on the same page, they were able to finally win the Raw Tag Team titles at December 18th's Roadblock End of the Line, this marking the Irishman's first ever run with the tag belts. From there, The Bar became one of the tag division's top acts for the next 3 years as they dismantled teams such as Big Cass and Enzo Amore, the Hardy Boys, and The Shield, becoming 4-time champions by the end of their run. But while their run would continue to team up for a little while past WrestleMania 34, even seeing some more success, it would be that night which saw things spiritually end when they hit their lowest point, losing to the team of Braun Strowman and Nicholas, a 10-year-old boy supposedly picked from the crowd who was in truth the son of referee John Cone. Yes, losing to a preteen at the Showcase of the Immortals wasn't exactly the Bar's finest moment, and when they were drafted over to SmackDown a month later, things didn't fare much better as they were on the losing end of a feud with the New Day, this costing them both a chance to enter that year's Money in the Bank ladder match. After they failed to win the SmackDown Tag Team titles on a number of different occasions though, by the end of the 1000th episode of SmackDown, things did begin to shift in their favor once again when they were able to pin the New Day to hold the Blue Brand's tag gold above their heads for the first time. And they would go on to hold these belts until the 2019 Royal Rumble, at which point they were defeated by the duo of The Miz and Shane McMahon, as the belts were relegated to a prop for their WrestleMania feud. Soon after that, the team was quietly dissolved when Sheamus suffered a concussion and had to be pulled from action for a few weeks, during which time Cesaro was drafted over to Raw, leaving the Irishman without a partner when he returned. Still, it could have been worse. There were some fears at this time that Sheamus may have had to retire completely, in fact, when it was discovered that he was suffering from spinal stenosis, the same injury that had ended the in-ring careers of both Edge and Paige. Despite this, however, doctors seem to be okay with him hitting the ring, though most likely with the understanding that he's now on borrowed time. With that in mind then, the Celtic Warrior has spent the last few years doing everything he can to shine. More recently feuding with Jeff Hardy over on SmackDown in the summer of 2020, and then from there moving over to Raw, where he finally got a chance to have a program with his old friend, the by then WWE Champion Drew McIntyre. The chemistry between the two making Raw in large parts bearable, as they initially teamed up to take on The Miz and John Morrison before Sheamus predictably turned on his buddy, and the two had a couple of fantastic matches on Raw in March of 2021, and then another one again at the subsequent Fastlane pay-per-view. And since losing that feud, Sheamus has turned his attentions back towards the United States title, winning this for a third time from Matt Riddle at WrestleMania 37 to prove that he's still a force to be reckoned with in WWE. Where he goes from there remains to be seen. Of course, with his spinal issues likely being a problem that will worsen over time, we can't see him going for another decade, but even if he only has a few more years left in him, we're sure he'll make the most of it by continuing to have some of the most underrated matches in WWE. Yes, for all the criticism the company gets about its often formulaic and soft in-ring style, people rarely talk about how much guys like Sheamus are able to provide a breath of fresh air to this, working a stiff style that wouldn't be out of place in New Japan Pro Wrestling. So given how underrated he is, we'd love to see Sheamus get one more run with the WWE title before he's done, because if there's anyone that deserves it, it's the Celtic Warrior. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.